Hello everyone and welcome from around the world. I'm Emily Pankhurst and today is August the 12th, 2011. This episode is on the UK and the devastation that is rocking the once great empire. Most news agencies have said those who are rioting are prominently young people. What they are not saying is that the same group is faced with particularly dire economic prospects. More than 20% of 16 to 24-year-olds in the area of rebellion are out of work, compared to a nationwide unemployment rate of 7.9%, the highest level recorded since the early 90s. So instead of the usually Western media coverage of criminality and thuggery, we here at the World Revolution News are going to dig a little deeper into the ultimate question of why. I will turn it over to our new British correspondent.
Hello, I'm Thomas Paine, filling in for Thomas Jefferson, and thank you for watching the World Revolution News. The civil unrest which ignited in Tottenham just a few days ago, and which has rapidly spread through London and to other towns and cities across the country, has been largely and predictably condemned by politicians and the mainstream media as mindless violence, theft, and thuggery. While there is no denying that a number of the attacks have affected my fellow British communities, some of whom have lost their homes and possessions, and even some cases, their life, an overall condemnation of those involved in the unrest is not necessarily appropriate and actually draws attention away from the context in which these historical events are taking place. In cities, towns and rural areas alike, we now have record numbers of young unemployed people, often denied benefits, with few prospects, and those living in urban areas facing constant harassment by the police. In part to movements like UK Uncut, in which government support for the ultra-rich corporations at the expense of the already impoverished have taken place. As you will see, the fatal shooting of Mark Duggan and subsequent police lies might be one cause for the revolt. But other factors not covered by the media is that in the UK, a police officer can stop and search a vehicle without consent, and therefore without warrant, under Section 44 of the Terrorism Act 2000. The article also allows for the officer to stop and search or question any person. They have consistently been searching and probing blacks, especially the youth, ever since. Add another fact from the Centre for Economics and Business Research, which has stated that 52% of last year's university leavers were unemployed or underemployed 6 months after graduating in the UK. This is a very scary statistic for the whole country. According to Tony Schmauder, a social psychologist at the University of British Columbia, the real reasons for this rebellion, which is a better word for it than riot, are economic conditions, racism and police brutality. It's likely some rioters in Britain believe there's a possibility the havoc they're wreaking might force a political change. End quote. Some have pointed to unemployment, insensitive policing, and widespread anger over the government's austerity budget, which will cut £80 billion in public spending by 2015, or $129 billion. Most of the protesters reportedly come from poorer communities, and poor socio-economic conditions have been labelled as a factor in the rebellion. In an interview with the BBC, criminology professor John Pitts said riots are complex events and cannot be explained away as just thuggery. They have no career to think about. They are not us, they live out there on the margins, enraged, disappointed, capable of doing some awful things, said Pitts. Megan Bowler, who teaches at the University of Toronto's Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, has said the following in comparison to the Arab Uprising. Quote, "Here it's not about a dictator. Here the issue is the corporation as a representative symbol. These things always spiral off into hitting the mom and pop stores, which is unfortunate. It's no coincidence this would happen so soon after the worldwide freakout about stocks and the economic crisis. When you listen to the local voices in London, who are not represented by mainstream media, for the most part, they are talking about the lack of jobs, inequality, the youth clubs that were cut. So they have no jobs and nothing to do." She also added that, when social media helped protesters organize and overthrow corrupt regimes in the Arab world earlier this year, while also providing citizen journalism when mainstream media was shut out. It was lauded as a tool of democracy. However, when the same methods are used in a scenario like Britain, they are seen as disturbing. End quote. In an interview with CBC News Network, British freelance journalist Dominique Velitis said Londoners were feeling both afraid and angry. Maybe a feeling that politicians aren't listening to them. That police aren't listening to them, he added. A walkabout by London Mayor Boris Johnson turned into a PR disaster after local people started bombarding him about the crisis. There is a culture of entitlement in the UK, says David Wilson, Professor of Criminology at Birmingham City University and a former prison governor. But it's not just about the underclass, it's about politicians, it's about bankers, it's not just about a particular class, it permeates all levels of society. When we see politicians claiming for flat-screen TVs and getting jailed for fiddling their expenses, it's clear that young people of all classes aren't being given appropriate leadership. End quote. To only hear the mainstream blur, you would think all of these rebels are criminals and are just out for themselves. What they won't mention is Fitwatch and its reports. Fitwatch was formed over 3 years ago as a street-level response to intimidation and harassment from the forward intelligence teams of FIT, with tactics ranging from blocking cameras to printing numbers, names, and photographs of known police officers in their blog. Through their research and criminal trials for blocking police cameras, Fitwatch has been instrumental in bringing much of the information about protester databases and the domestic extremist units into the public domain. In a report from the Edmonton Rebellion on Monday, a Fitwatcher noted that most of the anger was targeted against corporate targets, such as Tesco's and the phone warehouse, just like Sony earlier this week in London. They also noted that a young black man who was there monitoring policing of the disturbances then was arrested and beaten up in the back of the van. Marion Fitzgerald, visiting professor of criminology at the University of Kent, went on to say the following. The socially excluded are not always the ones who are rioting. In fact, they are often the ones who are most vulnerable to riots. We need a better thought-out approach, rather than just using social exclusion as an excuse. It's too soon to say this, Professor Fitzgerald says. The full implementation of the cuts to local authority services that will have the biggest impact on these areas will not be fully felt until next year. End quote.
That is a terrifying thought. The biggest devastation is probably yet to be seen in England. But also the fact that this rebellion, like all others this year, is about the rich banking cartel, located in the City of London. The gap between them and the poor has never been greater. The revolution is ripening. For now they are beginning to smell the smoke of their own fires, that the banks themselves have had a hand in creating. Thank you for watching the World Revolution News, and next week we will be on vacation, just like Cameron and Obama, so we will see you again, on August the 26th. Have a good weekend everyone. And please remember, as always, it's the United Banking Corporations versus, and not me versus you, for we are the many, and they are the few.